Hello, everyone. This is the UW Debate Society's seminar for Introduction to Canadian Parliamentary Debate. We're just going to go over timing structure, some things you can expect, in your CP debates, stuff like that. Very simple. So first, we're going to go through timing structures, and there's a couple different ones in CP debating that you can probably expect to see, and we'll go over each of them one by one. So first, we're going to start off with the traditional government and opposition timing structures. Keep in mind that CP differs from BP debating in that there's only two teams competing. So in BP debating, you're probably used to four different teams competing on opening government, opening opposition, closing government, closing opposition. Whereas CP debate is a direct one-to-one. You have your government bench, you have your government team, and you have your opposition team. So then, as for the timing structures for these two teams, the traditional one is a very standard one that people oftentimes kind of default to, especially if you like to talk a lot. And I'll go into why it's the case in a little bit. But first, let's start with the traditional government speaker. So basically, what traditional government is you have your standard 7-minute speeches that you'd probably be used to if you were used to debating in British parliamentary. But the only difference is that now you have the opportunity as the government side to give a 3-minute reply speech at the very end of the debate. Because basically after these two speakers speaks, and then these two speakers speak, the government side can come and do reply at the very, very end. And essentially, if you're a first speaker, you're basically going to be speaking one last time in the round if you choose this timing structure for 3 minutes. The next is traditional opposition. And basically, it's also a standard 7-minute speech for the leader of opposition, or I think it's the member of opposition, as they call it in CP format, in which they have 7 minutes to reply to this speaker. And what happens then is that after the second speaker speaks on just like government side, the second opposition speaker has to speak 10 minutes to respond to their case. And this is why a lot of people really appreciate the traditional opposition timing structure, because you just get to say so much stuff. You have a lot of time to kind of, really develop analysis. You have a lot of time to engage and weigh and stuff like that, in which this extra, 3 minutes that you would get, in addition to the 7 minutes, means that this 10-minute speech is extremely powerful in being able to respond to the vast majority of the government cases. So this is like the traditional timing structure for like opposition. And then finally, after like this speaker speaks, then the government first speaker can come back and do their 3-minute reply. So then let's go back to some other timing structures. So the other two alternatives that kind of exist are the PMRE, which is the Prime Minister's Reply Extended, and the Split Up, where you basically split up the 10-minute speech. Very intuitive names, I know. So the PMRE essentially is you take the 1 minute that you would have in your 7-minute speech over here, and you move that 1 minute. So I'll do some math for you. So you have a 7-minute speech initially, you minus 1, right? Equals 6, and you move this one into the reply speech. So the reason why people like to do this, because you might be wondering, well, why would I want to take more time away from my first speech? The speech that matters a lot, right? The reason why people oftentimes do this, and why this is a very popular form of timing structure for government teams, is because you're still able to develop your analysis a good amount with that 6 minutes. But what this means is that having this extra 1 minute in your reply speech means you're better able to kind of respond to the rest of the opposition's case, right? Because think about it this way: regardless of whether you split op or traditional opposition, the speaker order is this person, this person, this person, and then these two people go back to back, right? So you're going to have to respond to like at least 10 minutes of case lines, right? In this case, then 3 minutes is oftentimes insufficient to respond to it in any meaningful way. So having that extra minute gives you a lot more leeway in terms of how you want to weigh arguments, how you want to engage with analysis from the other team. So PMRE is a very popular form of timing structure for government teams, because you want to give yourself the most ability to respond to everything that we got from opposition. So that 1 minute is better used in the reply speech in order to engage with the other team, as opposed to, for example, just having like the 7 minutes to like build up your case from the very beginning. I'm not saying that traditional government puts you at a disadvantage necessarily. Obviously, you would play it by ear, but as a general rule, it is a lot more helpful to be able to have the extra minute in your reply speech from the government side. And the next is split up. So what is split up? Split opposition is very like intuitive of name. You just split up the 10-minute speech from like the opposition side, because some people might not be as comfortable, speaking the entire 10 minutes. They might just be comfortable speaking 7 if you're just a British parliamentary debater. So in this case, you don't want to commit to the entire 10-minute speech. If that's the case, then this is a very popular timing format, because now you're able to share the burden of that 10-minute speaking time between yourself and your partner. So, for example, if you were the second speaker on opposition, if you were to do traditional, you would do a 10-minute speech. But here, as a second speaker, you only have to do 7 minutes. So if you're used to British parliamentary, this is going to be very easy for you. And then basically after your 7-minute speech, your first speaker gets to come back and do a 3-minute reply right after your speech. So it's kind of like a traditional government timing format, like not exactly, but it's kind of like that, where you get to split up your speech, you get to share the burden amongst like your other teammates. And sometimes this may be helpful as well, because if your partner has like insights that you might not have followed, if your partner has things that they want to talk about that you might have not have been able to cover, then doing the split opposition might be wise, because you're able to kind of share the burden of replying to like the government case together, rather than just resting it on a singular person. The only disadvantage is because if you're a very good second speaker, if you're able to speak for the 10 minutes, you're probably able to build up a much more cohesive 10-minute speech than having that split up between two different speakers. But this is marginal. It's all based on personal preference. It's what you kind of want to do. But this is just a timing format that does exist, and one that you can utilize in your debates. So we can go with the next slide then, about the timing structure or the order of speeches. So I think I kind of already tied a lot of this into like the explanations for the timing structures, but I can go over this really, really quickly. So essentially, obviously you have the first government speaker opening up the debate with the motion. The next, you have the opposition's first speaker to respond to them. So it's kind of like a BP debate where the LO's response to the PM, and then the DPM, whatever, comes back up and they respond to this speaker. Very simple so far. And then obviously opposition second speaker responds to this speaker. So this is kind of a very simple front half BP-esque kind of debating. The only difference now here is that the opposition first speaker comes back before the government first speaker responds. So, intuitively speaking, you'd probably think that after the opposition speaker speaks, obviously the gov comes back and then the op comes back at the end. The difference in CP then is that these two go all together, and then government gets the final word. So after the opposition second speaker speaks and delivers their reply to like the government bench, the opposition first speaker gets to come back and finish up their speech. And that's kind of how it goes. In a traditional timing format, though, the opposition first speaker just doesn't really come back to speak, because the opposition second speaker speaks for the entire 10 minutes. And that's kind of how it works. And then at the very end, the government first speaker comes back and replies to all of this stuff. All right, awesome. So I think that's it for the introduction to CP debating. I guess like some really quick notes as well before I end this presentation is the idea of POIs. They essentially are basically the same, but with like some small caveats. So if you're doing the Prime Minister reply extension, give me 1 second. If you're doing the Prime Minister reply extended, in which you only have 6 minutes to speak, I believe the protected time is the first 30 seconds and last 30 seconds of the speech. So instead of having the 1 minute protected time at the very start and 1 minute at the end, it's reduced to 30 seconds, I'm pretty sure. And essentially, the reply speeches are just all protected time. So you cannot POI someone during a reply speech. And the 7-minute speech is similar to just BP, which you have 1 minute protected time front and back. And then finally, for the 10-minute speech, essentially what protected time is you have your first minute protected, and then how do I say this in a way that's not confusing? And then your last, I guess, your last 4 minutes are protected time. Yeah, your last 4 minutes are protected time, because think about it this way. If you were to split, this 10-minute speech into a 7-minute speech and a 3-minute speech, right? Basically, this 7-minute speech would have protected time at the first and last minutes of their speech. And then you have your reply speech in addition to that. So given that you can't POI during the reply speech and you can't POI during the first and last minute of this, what happens then is you have essentially 4 minutes of protected time at the very end of your 10-minute speech. That's kind of how it works. It seems more complicated than it is. it's much more intuitive once you kind of get into it. But yeah, I think that's mostly it for the Canadian parliamentary introduction. We'll go into more detail later on with like case preparation and stuff like that. But as for the timing structure and the structure of like the debate, this seems like a pretty this seems sufficient to kind of get the idea across.